1991. Recording an interview with a longtime resident of Newton, Evelyn, Berman. Now, how long have you lived in
I've lived in Newton since 1939. Most of that time I've lived in this house. There were a few years when my husband and I, as a newly married couple, lived at 37 Commonwealth Avenue in an apartment. Following that, we lived at 42 Stanley Road in Woburn. Subsequently, we moved back to this house.
Right here in Ellis Road.
At 30 Ellis Road in West Newton, right on West Newton Hill. So I've been here a long time. You want me to talk about what I mentioned about the buses and things?
Oh, sure.
When we first moved here in 1939, I was about 15 years old. At that time, in order to get into Boston, or into town as it was called, if one did not drive, and most families had only one car at the time, we certainly did, one took a bus that ran along Commonwealth Avenue. It ran from Norumbega Park, right opposite the area where the Totem Pole Ballroom was. There was a huge parking lot, and that's where the buses turned around and then went along to Lake Street. At Lake Street, you got on the Commonwealth Avenue line. Clearly, Newton was an expensive place to live in because one had a double fare to get into town. 5 cents for the bus, 10 cents on the trolley line. Several years later, the bus was discontinued, and then under Governor Peabody, it was reinstated for a while, and it's gone now.
So it ran for a period in the early 60s then?
I think so. I think so.
Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I think so. That's my memory, but I'm not absolutely positive. When I moved here, I was in the 10th grade, and I was in the 11th grade, and we moved here from Beachmont, which is part of Revere. It's located between Revere and Winthrop, but it was part of the municipality of Revere, and I was transferred from Revere High School to Newton High School. Newton High School at that time was composed of 3 buildings: the old building, Building 2, which was known as Building 1, Building 2, and I don't know when that was constructed, and Building 3, which was not too old, which was called the new building. Mm-hmm. I was placed in the English, the college bound people were for the most part either the English track or the math track, but they were equal. The emphasis was a little different. I went into the English, the language track, not the English track. Right. And my homeroom teacher was Margaret South. My homeroom teacher was Mrs. Boucher, Boucher. Margaret South was my history teacher. Miss Miles was my French teacher. Mr. Rinker was a wonderful teacher. Was another teacher, and there were several other teachers. I don't remember which was junior year and which was senior year.
What was the graduating class the year?
I graduated in 1942, and we were about to have our 50th reunion a year from June.
Right.
And
how many were in the graduating class?
I have that information upstairs because I've just gotten a letter telling us how many were in the graduating class. And in fact, our reunion will take place on the 50th anniversary of the very day we graduated. That's just the way it's working out.
But it must have been up in the 500s.
Oh, my feeling was around 700, but I can give...
That's right, only one high school for all of populace.
Yes,
right?
That's right, only one high school for all. The buildings were connected by underground tunnels, so that you did not have to go outside. And I'm not sure today I would go into an underground tunnel, but at the time it was simply accepted.
Yeah.
I felt I got a good education. I don't know if this was in my junior year or in my senior year, but you got your grades, your report cards by going from teacher to teacher. In each class, the teacher would write in whatever your grade was. I remember Dr. Land, who taught Latin, and I have had 4 years of Latin, and I think it was very important. Dr. Land, who was a wonderful teacher, I liked, all of us liked him very much. I could never quite figure out why, as seniors in high school, we had to read Cicero's essay De Senectute concerning old age, but we did. Dr. Land lost a son early in World War II, very sad occasion, and my memory is that a group or the classes got together and gave him a set of books. It was very sad. One thing I would like to point out in view of today's attitude toward education for women and gender bias in education is that I had two teachers whose names I well remember, but I will not put on this tape, two male teachers who were just terrible towards girls. In one math class, I was one of, I think, two girls in a class full of boys. Because I had transferred into the school from another school and my preparation was a little bit different, this teacher would denigrate me, make me feel awful, and I finally switched to a different math class. Similarly, in the chemistry class, it was just awful. There were 4 girls in the class. He would have us sit one behind the other and get up there and say, 4 out of every 10 women die of cancer. That might not have been so bad, but he was not helpful. He was really terrible towards women, and that was just awful. I subsequently heard that the school system, for particular reasons, had to get rid of him.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And but the general education was good. The staff was supportive. I remember, for God knows what reason, the name of the principal. It was Raymond Green, and the assistant principal, I believe, was Elwood C. Drake. I don't know why I remember. I have a memory for. I have a mind full of trivia sometimes.
Perhaps it's coming to just for 2 years. Those 2 years were important.
Right.
In the school.
Right.
Maybe last 2 years, more years were spent here. They would have all blended together. But when you make that transfer, it's very vital.
Really,
to school
really,
kids, yeah.
really. You could take a bus, but I think I walked to school most of the time.
You were in an advantageous position here, so what is it, a 15-minute walk perhaps?
It's down that way. Maybe it was, I don't remember, but
20 minutes, I think.
not more than that. The area has changed, clearly. It's been built up. I had a couple of friends with whom I would walk to school. One girl lived at the corner of Ellis and Valentine Street, and I think her name was Edith Davenport. We would then go down to Lowell Avenue, where we would pick up Lenny Eastman and sometimes Edith Oppenheim, who also lived in Lowell Avenue. But as you walk down Lowell Avenue on the corner of Hyde Street, where after the war many houses were built, that was all just forest land, and there was a spring there, and you could stop and take some water if you wanted to.
Glory.
My memories of Newton High School are very positive. I had a good education, and except for those two teachers, and I myself really feel that had I been encouraged and helped more, I could have been a very, not a great mathematician, but I could have done more in math. What else can I say about Newton High School? Very active in the League of Women Voters.
Active in let's go
Okay.
continue with the subsequent
All right.
education we're on.
Okay, after I graduated from high school in June of 1942, in the following September I entered Smith College, where I graduated in 1946. There were several of us from our class who were admitted to Smith and who, in fact, did finish, and some of us are still in touch loosely, and there is one person with whom I am in close touch. Following Smith College, in those days, if you graduated from a women's liberal arts college, you didn't have too many choices. I subsequently became a secretary for Mark DeWolf Howe at Harvard Law School, and after that I was a secretary to Charles W. Morton, who was the associate editor of the Atlantic Monthly magazine. In 1948, I was married to Herbert L. Berman, and in 1950, our first son, Russell, was born. In those years, naturally, Mother stayed home and took care of the baby. I was out of the labor force, but I became very active in the League of Women Voters. In 1952, we had another son, Henry, and in 1954, a third son, Martin. I became very active in the League of Women Voters, which was a strong force in the city of Newton in the 50s and 60s.
This is the Massachusetts. There's a big Boston one, and there were the city ones.
Oh, yes.
And they're still divided into cities?
I don't know. I think so. There still is a Newton League, although I am no longer active in it. That took up a big part of my life. In 1964, I decided to go back to graduate school part-time. I went to the Simmons School of Library Science, from which I graduated in 1967. Then I worked at Northeastern Law School for 10 years. I woke up one morning and said, I don't want to do this anymore. I changed careers, and I went to the Children's Museum, where I worked for a little more than 9 years, being in charge of professional visitors and in charge of volunteers. About a year and a half ago, I was written out of the budget, which is the ultimate insult. And since then, I am no longer in the labor force. I have become very much involved with the International Institute of Boston, where I am a member of the board of directors. I have several other activities. My life has included a good deal of travel with my husband, and I have enjoyed this. One other thing which I want to say is that during my years at Smith, I spent one summer as a student intern at the Hudson Shaw Labor School, which had previously been the Bryn Mawr Summer School for Women Workers in Industry, and the papers about that are at the Hillis Library, I believe, at Radcliffe. It was
maybe the Schlesinger Archives.
Schlesinger,
Yeah.
yes, that you are correct. I'm sorry. That was that involved living. The Hudson Shaw Labor School took women who from labor unions, brought them for a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever they or their unions could afford to pay for them, to this really old, very beautiful house on the banks of the Hudson in West Park, New York. At that time, when they got there, the staff would try to teach them parliamentary procedure, various information about the labor movement. Remember, this was during World War II, so it was very important.
Right.
My memory is that the staff included Martha von Heusen Tabor, a woman named Retta Arter, another woman whose name I do not recall, who was a professor of economics at Wellesley. That was a very important experience for me. I learned a lot, not so much in facts, but in learning how other people live and how life is for other people. In 1940, this was in the summer of 1945, I became very friendly with one of the students there, Lou Veda Allison, a black woman from Chicago. We were young and we were friends, and we had to go down to New York. The school was over, to go back to our homes, and I to Boston and she to Chicago. I guess I was very young and naive, because I said, "Oh boy, New York, we're going to have a good time, and we're going to go to such and such a place for lunch," where I had been taken by the aunt of a friend of mine, and it was on Central Park, south or west, a ritzy address. So that was about the only restaurant I knew in New York. So we walked up there. We walked to the door at 12 o'clock noon. There was not a customer there, although they were getting ready to take them. The waiter took a look at a black woman and a white woman and said, "I'm sorry, we're completely reserved." Lou Veda, of course, knew immediately what was going on. It took me a little while to have it sink through. We eventually went to another place I remembered called Brewery Lane, a very good restaurant, but I think it was run by people from some islands in the Caribbean. Of course, we were very welcome there, and we had a very good time. What happened to the Veda after that, I don't remember. She probably doesn't remember what happened to me. We went on, but I think that's very significant for me to have had that experience at that time in my life. Discrimination was something either you didn't hear about or heard about very slightly. Now, our children all went to the Newton schools through the Newton school system. Their elementary school was the Claflin School, which has now become a studio residence for artists. They had a good education there.
That's within walking.
Yes. We could walk down to the end of Ellis Road, where there was a police crossing lady, and then they would walk to the school straight along. One didn't worry about many of the things that one worries about today. And they came home for lunch for most of those years. It was a good way to live for them. They got their exercise walking to school. They came home and saw an authority figure at lunch, and they
didn't just all that lead from the gasoline.
Right. And they walked back and forth with their friends. They had their friends, they had their fights, but they interacted. So it was a very nice way to live. After Claflin School, they went to Warren Junior High School on Washington Street, which is about to become some sort of a housing complex. Again, they had very good experiences there. I felt the teachers were good, and I felt the counseling was good, and I was very pleased with it. Subsequently, they went to what I think at that time was no longer Newton High School, but Newton North High School. Still had the three old buildings. It wasn't what they have now. Again, they got a good education. The difference was that I could see was they had by that time instituted the house system. But this was all very...
and their graduating classes were what?
Let's see. I have to go... Russell, the eldest, was the graduating class of 1968. Henry was class of 70, and Martin was class of 72. Russell, in his senior year in high school, was an American Field Service exchange student. At that time, you could choose your hemisphere, but you could not choose your country. He was sent by chance to Salzburg, Austria. He lived with a very nice family, and he attended a gymnasium. He went over not speaking or understanding any German. Took him about 3 weeks, and then he was at home. It had a profound effect on his life, because he came back to Harvard, where he did not major in German, but he took a German course every term. And when he graduated, since he didn't know what he wanted to do, he was able to get a DAAD, D-A-A-D, Deutsche Academic something or other, scholarship to study anything he wanted in any university in Germany for a year. And he went back there, and he re-met a young woman whom he had met as a high schooler, and subsequently they married. They've now been married for 16 years.
Great.
And this, I think, is very interesting to show the effect that an experience like AFS can have in your life. He's now a professor of German literature. He's been at Stanford, he's at Columbia. He may go back to Stanford, he may stay at Columbia, I don't know. But that's
his undergraduate major was what?
Afro-American Studies. It was the first class. It was the first class that could graduate in Afro-American Studies. Of course, this was the time of the Vietnam uprisings, and things were in a turmoil. Yeah. And then Henry went on, and he went on to Ithaca College, and he is in television production. And Martin went to Connecticut College in New London, where he majored in Chinese, and he said he was going to want to go to Taiwan to perfect his Chinese. As a result, he's been living in Asia, various parts of Asia, for 16 years now.
All right.
15, 16 years now. Yeah.
My goodness, they must have had good preparation at high school in order to indulge themselves in college.
Really. And so
you've done quite a bit of traveling.
yes, we have done, because one child was living in Europe. We've made several trips to Europe, because over the years he didn't have just that 1 year in Europe when he was doing his graduate work. You have to write your dissertation and all of that. And we've done quite a bit of traveling in Asia, so that's why we have lots of other stuff around. So
now, you were going to say something about Ellis Road here?
yes, Ellis Road is part of what was Ellis Farm. I pointed out to you the house on the corner of Walwinet and Commonwealth, which was the original farmhouse. Across from that, again, across Walwinet Road on the corner of Walwinet and Ellis, Walwinet and Commonwealth, when I first moved here, there was a family by the name of Berkowitz who lived there, and they were lovely people. And very often we would go down there for a barbecue. That was the expression that was used. And they had a patio in their back, and they told me that that had been the floor of the original cow barn of the Ellis farm. But what I want to talk about more is the difference in attitudes among people in those years. When we first moved here, there were no fences. The architects who designed many of these houses, and the other architects, had yards in the back that flowed into one another. There were no divisions. They were very, very beautiful. Since then, with society has changed, and we now have fences,
Mm-hmm.
and we have ill feelings, and we have people who, you have some people who think only of their own needs and don't think of the total beauty of the neighborhood, and I guess that's progress, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Right, right. I once knew the name of the architect who designed this house. His name was either Ham or Bacon. I don't know which.
It's a lovely house. How far back does it go?
I think it was built, I don't really know, around 1930, and it was a well-designed house. It's sited very well. I get wonderful sun. I mean, all over the house. It's just wonderful.
You never need those. That's which street?
That's Commonwealth Avenue.
And you get a sense of movement out there that you don't have to look at it.
That's
you don't
right.
care to. You don't get a sense of isolation. You have to get the other direction. You get
Right.
It's ideal. Absolutely ideal.
At that time, what I wanted to speak about, which I think is very important, is that and I alluded to it in terms of the fences, is that people were friendlier then. They had only one car. There was no television diversion. Some of this time was during wartime. And they did things as a little community. And my father, who was a wonderful man, and he was very outgoing and got things going. My mother was very hospitable. And he formed just an informal group, the Ellis Road Associates. And they would get together. They would have their good times. And across the street where Ben and Sybil Phillips lived, in that beautiful house in which every window is different. It's a gorgeous house. Helene and Stan Miller live there now. In the backyard, where there's now a magnificent swimming pool, used to be just a great big piece of land, and they used to do their horseshoe pitching up there and have their baseball games, and it was just a very friendly feeling. Going up the street at number 6 Ellis Road, which is at the corner of Valentine and Ellis, Max and Mrs. Chernus, her name. The Chernuses lived, and Mrs. Chernus' name will come back to me. They were very, very nice people. They had several children, and particularly a daughter who was a year or two older than me, who sadly died of a brain tumor at a very young age. The next house, the Mileskis lived. The third house up, Dave and Marion Bond lived with their 2 daughters, Judy and Sylvia. I believe that that house previously was either built or owned by a man named Lavaji, who, from my memory, I know, owned a nightclub in Boston, or whatever that might be. Whereas, then we come to this house, 30 Ellis Road. Our family were the second occupants. I believe the first occupants were people by the name of Walsh, and he had been in the oil business because the architect had put in gas heat, and he had changed it to oil. And the next house down on this side belonged to the Shapiros, and I think his parents had built the house, had lived there before him. The next house down, I think belonged to people by the name of Martin. I don't know much about them. Subsequently, Dr. Albert, a well-known obstetrician, moved in with his family. The next house down was occupied by Lena and Monty Cohen. And we come to a wooden structure. All of these houses I've mentioned are sort of brick Tudor. We come to a wooden structure, now occupied by Georgia Kelly, but at the time maybe occupied by people named Ballroom. They lived there at some point. I don't know if they were the original people. And next to them, on Walwinet Road, lived the Berkowitzes. As we go up Ellis Road from Valentine on the opposite side of the street, I remember the Davenports lived, it was actually on Valentine, but on the corner of Ellis. That's where Judge and Mrs. Ginsburg live now. Next to that, where there is now a fairly modern house occupied by Ed and Martha Green, there had been nothing before.
So that was built.
That was built late 50s, early 60s. And next to that, of course, is the house now occupied by Stan and Helene Miller, before them by the Knisnicks, and before that built by and occupied by Ben and Sybil Phillips. Going down the street again, there are two ranch-style houses. The one next to the Millers is occupied by the Hearsts. That was built by Train, who was a builder, sometime in the 50s. And the house next to it was also a later built house. The house next to that, opposite Georgia Kelly's house, on the corner of, on the north corner of Walwinet and Ellis, now occupied by the Theses. When we moved here, was occupied by a family by the name of Reuben. So that gives you the geography of Ellis Road.
There was something doing all the time if these houses came in bit by bit.
Right.
If they were to be hammering.
Well, actually, there were only 3 houses that came in bit by bit. Now, when the Greens built their house, we are very close to the Greens. They're a wonderful family. But when they built their house, they had to do some blasting.
Oh my!
That whole area, that whole lot was considered something that nobody would ever build on because it had ledge. Yeah. It had ledge. Well, Ed Green, who is a builder, or was a builder, built on it. They had to do some blasting, and we suffered some window damage. It was all taken care of,
right.
you know, but Martha, who is a dear friend, now likes to quote me as having said to somebody, "Those people must be awful people blasting our street." But they've been wonderful neighbors. It's been a real pleasure. Backing up on the houses here, to go along Commonwealth Avenue, right, the house that's now on the north side of Commonwealth Avenue at the corner of Valentine and Commonwealth did not exist when we moved here. The house next to it, in fact, did exist, and the name will come to me in just a moment. Next to that, one of the huge, beautiful wooden structure, the Hyde family lived, Al Hyde and his family, and next to that, I don't remember the name of the people who moved here when we moved in, but shortly after that, the Levies moved in, and they still occupy it. The next house just did not exist. That's sort of a Johnny come lately. When you the land on the south side of Commonwealth Avenue is partly MDC land and partly owned by the Newton Cemetery. For many years there was just the small MDC, unobtrusive, fairly attractive building. Several years ago, the Newton Cemetery applied for and received permission to build new greenhouses there, so we don't have that unobstructed view of trees and so forth. We have to look at greenhouses, which is not the worst thing in the world. I also remember when we first moved here that if there was a snowstorm, the sidewalks would be plowed by a horse pulling a wedge-shaped plow and a man helping him. That's a memory that no longer exists now that I read that the aldermen say we have to shovel our own sidewalk. At the moment, I think that's
Interesting. You have the Newton Yearbook for class 42 there?
yes. This is the original yearbook with the pictures of the way it was then. The Newtonian for 1942, and the senior class officers included Roger Reedy, William Hooper, Joyce Jackson, Shirley Crafts, and Arthur Foster. Unfortunately, it doesn't identify.
Yeah, and your estimate were that there were about 700 graduates?
Just, if you wait a minute, I'll just count them up.
Well, there's no need to. But
Okay.
It's interesting what happens to the school population when you get 2 high schools now.
Yeah.
They probably total about 700 together, maybe a little less. You were a diverse group, weren't you? You drew from all of Newton, right?
Right, we did
Right.
draw from all of Newton.
And how many do you think in Newton were siphoned off to private prep schools or parochial schools at the time?
I don't know. Certainly there were parochial schools
Yeah.
here, but I really can't, I don't know anything about
Everybody
them.
that you knew in this area who were your peer group.
Most people went to public school. It was a very good school
It was
system.
well,
And
good reputation.
I don't know if it was because families were coming out of the depression or what, but I don't think private school was a big item the way it is today.
Nowadays, people move to Newton because the schools
Mhm.
are thought to be,
Right.
good, and you're getting a lot for your tax dollar. Was it true back then?
Oh, it was considered an excellent school system. Nowadays, I hear that it's not as good as because they have to give up this, that, or the other thing, and I'm sure they have to give up certain things. But it was considered an excellent school system. I felt I got a very good education, as did my children. Not everything was perfect. One of my children had a school counselor a college advisor whom I met, and I came home and I said to my husband, we've got to get somebody on our own. This man has no vision. But so what? These things happen.
Right. And I guess everybody, back then people consciously said, well, if we move to Newton, there's the advantage
That's
of the
right.
school system.
That's right.
It's still considered that way for outsiders, such as
Uh-huh.
myself.
Uh-huh.
And it's good that traditionally it goes on this way. You were mentioning about city services seem to be going down, and the snow shoveling and what have you. What about city government? Were people, your Ellis Road group, did you consciously think about election and all of
No,
back then?
no. The first thing, there was a group which sort of re-elected themselves. They were known as Republicans. At that time, the Democratic Party did not have a great reputation, maybe because the linkage to Curley, who had been in and out of jail or something. But I don't remember that. I think this Ellis Road Associates was a strictly social thing, and it was nice.
Now I think there are some very well thought out political campaigns in Newton, but do you recall any hard fought ones back then? Or?
When I was active in the League of Women Voters, there were some, but I don't recall. I just don't recall.
Right.
I can't say they didn't
Right.
exist. I suspect my interest.
Yeah, the League was always interested in presenting information for the
Information.
well-informed
Right.
voter to use.
Right.
Yeah, so you never took sides or anything, but you certainly got the information out to people. That's interesting. The league is still active as far as...
I believe it is still active.
How many women do you think were in the Newton League when you were in it?
Lots, because we used to have these discussion groups, these units. Oh no, these discussion groups, and any week we could have 5 or 6 or 7 in various parts of the city. So there were quite a few women. Do you want me to tell you the names of some of the presidents?
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, well, and perhaps you might want to talk to some of these people.
Indeed.
Okay. I remember, of course I remember, I just kind of, oh yeah, I can remember her maiden name, but that's not what you want. That's she lives here in Newton too, she'd be good. She's V. Slotnick was a president for a couple of terms, and she was very good, and she lives here in Newton in Waban,
Mm-hmm.
so you might want to speak with her. There was a Gertrude Rosenberg, and well, I cannot recall easily many of the other names of presidents, but many of the people who were active in the league subsequently went on to do important things in various fields,
Mm-hmm.
and it was wonderful because it was an active group, and we did things, and we certainly met and studied, and we became friends.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very good feeling. But again, it was just, the society was different then. You worked within your community, and
Right.
times.
Took care of the children first.
Right.
You had the children come.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that when you were home, you had a little bit more leisure time. I know that well. It does not occur.
It does not
Yeah.
happen.
You get chopped up in even more little pieces.
Right. I guess one thing I haven't mentioned is that we have been associated members of the Temple Emmanuel congregation ever since we moved here. The congregation was founded a couple of years before we joined.
So that would be...
Well, we moved here in 1939. I think the congregation was founded around 35 or 36.
And that wasn't moved from another geographical spot?
No. It was a
formed
brand
here.
new congregation. Yes, right. And so we've been associated and active with it all these years.
I hope they do a history of these things.
I hope so too. I will.
Yeah.
I will bring it up. Of course, if I bring it up, I may get the job.
Exactly. You've got to get them while they're still around.
That's true. That's true. And how did my mother live her life then? Well, she was at home. She was active in her congregation, and my mother and father had many friends, and this was always an open house. We were always entertaining friends, and my father would bring home wonderful people from all different walks of life. He became very friendly with Ernest Hoftheiser, who was, I think, the publisher of whatever the Daily Record was then, Boston American or something. And he and Ernie Hoftheiser were active in the Cross-Cut Pichon American Legion post, and they did a lot of good works.
Mm-hmm. Was that...
No, that was in Boston.
In Boston.
And again, I have a story for for the other person,
Yeah.
about that. And my parents had lots of friends, and it was a good feeling.
Gee, it wasn't hard to get out here with that bus coming straight down.
Yeah,
That's all I
really.
think was far off. It was much more accessible.
Oh, of course it was. There was no tea, but also the railroad went into South Station and stopped more frequently.
Yeah.
In
That's the main line. Or
that's right, in Newtonville and West Newton. I mean, this was a commuter railroad as well as a main railroad. So
just the thought of that convenient Commonwealth Avenue bus.
Oh, it was wonderful. And then you drive along Commonwealth Avenue. If you saw your friend waiting at a bus stop, you'd give him or her a ride, and even if they weren't a friend, you saw somebody waiting at the bus stop, you give them a lift, as the expression went.
Exactly.
Of course, today one is much more circumspect about picking up strangers.
But don't forget that was the holdover from that World War II gas ration. where
Right.
everything happened. And that goodwill lasted a bit, but your brother was
My brother, Arthur Harold Allen Tuck, he was 5.5 years younger than I was, went to the old Pierce School, which is now apartments for the elderly, located on Chestnut Street in West Newton. This was quite a long walk for some of the children from this area.
How long would it take them to walk?
Well, I don't remember, but they were little children, and the mothers considered it too long a walk. So it's my memory that several of the families got together and hired a cab to take them down there.
Okay, so they were assigned by virtue of
The area we
geography?
lived in, this is the school you went to.
But boy, they didn't cough up for the buses. That just was
They
not
didn't
done.
have buses for elementary school
Right.
students, because most elementary schools were considered to be in a neighborhood
Right.
that people could get to. They did have buses for high school students because it drew from all over the city.
But yet he was assigned to that, but it was...
But well, the mothers felt, or that's one of the things I remember,
Yeah.
maybe they didn't feel it for too long.
Yeah.
Because I can't say I was too interested in my
Right. That's
kid brother
interesting, though.
at the
You were
time.
elementary school, okay.
Yeah.
But then there must have been cooperation. And did your parents feel you got a good education at the PS?
Yes, at that school, and then he went on to, I don't know. I suppose he went to Warren Junior High School. I just don't know. He did not finish high school in Newton. He went on to New York Military Academy.
Interesting.